Sean Moore, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. Very happy to be here. Honored to be here.
Sean, this is going to be such a fun conversation. You bought an art gallery. It is a top performing gallery in the country. It's a 33-year-old business. It's a sizable business. We'll get into the numbers later. And you are an art enthusiast yourself with your own collection. So this aligns with a personal interest and passion. So we're going to hear all about this fascinating acquisition and, of course, learn about the business of art galleries and whether your cool story here is kind of a one-off or whether listeners should approach owners of galleries in their cities about selling. But let's start with a little background on you first, please, Sean, if you'd go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm originally from the Minneapolis area, and my family moved to Jacksonville, Florida when I was about 7, where I lived there till I was about 18. I went to Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, where I double majored in finance and management information systems. Out of school, I got a job at Ernst & Young Management Consulting in 1998. It was a great job right out of school. I started traveling a lot every week to different cities where I would have projects for 3, 6, 8, 9 months at a time. And one of these projects was like a 9 or 10 month stint in the Netherlands. And it was based out of The Hague, but I would be living in Amsterdam. So this was a life-changing event for a 24-year-old to go to Europe and, be on an expense account. And
and this was before pot was legal in the U.S., by the way, everyone. So let's remember what Amsterdam's was a mecca for a certain something back in the day.
A decade and a half before Denver or before Colorado paved the way here in the U.S. So I was also traveling across Europe and got to visit up to 12 countries during that stint. So I kind of lived in this hotel, but I would check out on the weekends and check back in, on Sunday night, and
amazing.
Take the train down to Den Haag, on Monday morning. That was my life. It was great. I was taking the train to and from work, and sometimes I'd stay in The Hague and stayed at a hotel around on the North Sea. It was great. It started my love of travel. I think I had been to Norway and France and Italy before that, but after this, it was a marriage. It became, my number one passion really in life. And, coupling that with my love of world history and literature and learning languages, very humanities, focused interests, it started to draw a connection briefly to my business choice here, which is I started to collect art everywhere I went. So I started buying, paintings, watercolors, sculptures. It started in Holland and France and Czech Republic and Spain. And, eventually over the years, all across Asia and South America as well. But art became my kind of number 2 passion in life, because everywhere I'd go, I'd come back with something that I would put up on my wall that would remind me of that cityscape, that pastoral setting, that religious icon, or, whatever historical figure, that I picked up. And over the years, my house became a museum of all my travels. So that's
Sean, since you told me that on our pre-call, I've been kicking myself for not having done the same. I've had the good fortune to visit a lot of places, and I've, picked up a piece or two along the way, but I love the idea of just that's going to be the thing that you do on every trip is find something beautiful and bring it home with you as a keepsake, as something to decorate your space. It's a great idea, and building a collection over the long term, that each item of which has kind of personal resonance and recalls a memory.
Yeah, it's great. And I've got a friend who used to collect shot glasses everywhere he went. I'm not going to say who he is, but he is going to be on your podcast at some point. He'd watch me collect these paintings, and he got the bug. He got into it, and he started collecting paintings. And now his home is very much decorated with, masks from Africa when we went to the World Cup down there, and paintings from all over the world. And it's caught on with a lot of my friends and even my mom, who I also travel with. So it's a great pastime and a great passion.
Really cool. Okay. So where do you find yourself professionally in the years leading up to where you now are?
Yeah, so I finished up the gig with Ernst & Young after the Amsterdam project. So I got recruited and took a new role as an executive account leader for a tech services company called Service Source here in Denver. They're a global company that provided recurring revenue management services for big tech. And I managed the executive relationships and global delivery teams for some of our biggest clients like Microsoft and Adobe and Avaya, Broadcom, Mitel, and a handful of others. I think if you're Microsoft, you've got your biggest customers, and you're going to really have a close relationship with them. But then you've got your long tail or your SMB, small medium businesses, and you can't get to all of them, right? So they would hire companies like ours to engage with them at that level, and our job was to bring in that large amount of recurring revenue where, if you look at one client, it might not be much, but if you look at all those SMB clients, it was a lot of revenue, right? So it was nothing to sneeze at, and they didn't want to lose it. And we were really good at doing that. And then the last job that I had was I was recruited to another role where it was a very enticing opportunity, a great compensation package to be, the VP of solutions at a larger, like $4 billion tech outsourcing company that was looking to expand their footprint in the tech industry, customer success, recurring revenue, and sales services type of work that I was doing previously. So I started getting a little frustrated after about a year, and maybe in that last year of employment there, leading up to January, or I guess April of this year, I started looking for other opportunities, and I'd message my friend, the same guy who collects the shot glasses, say, hey, when are we going to get out of this rat race? What are we going to do? And this is also my best friend from college, where when we were 20 years old, 21 years old, right after we graduated, we'd sit up all night in our apartment in Dallas, Texas, and sit outside of our balcony and sit there and try to talk about what companies we'd start up, and how we could be CEOs someday, and how are we going to get that done? But we were both just too green, I think, to really make anything like that happen, and we had to learn our lessons along the way. And I truly do believe that my career prepared me for the exercise that I just went through with the acquisition. So I sent that text to him. He came back and said, yeah, I know, I've been thinking about it. And then, that's probably towards the end of last year. And then right after New Year's 2023, in beginning of January this year, he called me and said, and he just started talking really fast. And he was like really excited to tell me all about all this reading that he had been doing over his Christmas break. And, he started talking about this book that he read called Buy Then Build. He told me about SBA loans and how you can get a loan for up to $5 million, but you have to have, some collateral and blah, blah, blah. And then he told me about the Acquiring Minds podcast, how he'd listened to maybe like 20 hours of it so far over his time at Christmas, when he probably should have been hanging out with his family. But I think he was, really getting into it. And he also told me about the Biz Buy Sell marketplace. And then, finally, like the thing that clinched it for me was when he told me about the ROBS transaction, which is the rollover for business startups, acronym ROBS. This is when it all clicked for me. This is when everything changed. And he shared how you can use the funds from a retirement account to fund a startup business, or to acquire a business, or acquire the assets of a new business. And as soon as I heard this, I jumped in with 100 questions. And because over the last 25 years of my corporate career, I did a great job of tucking money away into my retirement accounts, but I was, only modestly liquid, in terms of, money that I could put down to make an investment. And so for me, it was like the parting of the seas, where it was a creation of a path to a new future, and all these light bulbs were going off for me. And I felt like this is my moment. The clouds were parting, the light was shining. And because what seemed so harrowing before, the idea of building a startup, having low income for a couple of years, and you're having to fund an acquisition with modest liquidity, like that was starting to be no longer a problem. Like there was not an obstacle anymore. So I quickly told him to stop talking because it was all quite confusing. But I said, look, immediately send me the name of the book, Buy Then Build by Walker Deibel. Send me your contact's name at this, Rob's transaction company, which for him was Guidant. And his contact was a guy named Josh Level, who was awesome, by the way. And he was a fountain of information for me. And, I'd recommend listeners, if you're exploring, to go this path, reach out, find Josh Level at Guidant and tell him I sent you. And finally I said, what's the link to that podcast? And so he sent me the link to your podcast, Acquiring Minds, which, I told you this in our pre-call, Will, like, I can't thank you enough. You've created a community here, and this podcast did so much for me. And I really think you're doing your listeners a huge service. So thank you.
That's awesome, Sean. Thank you for saying that, man. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah, of course. And I couldn't hang up the phone fast enough. Once his text messages started coming through, I was like, okay, gotta go. I literally said, like, I'm going to call you in 2 weeks. And so we hung up. I dove right into the book. I started listening to the podcast. I did my research on the Rob's transaction. I started, trying to understand, what the whole business broker market was all about, because Walker Deibel really focuses on that in his book. Building relationships to get upstream deal flow, and I started looking at biz buy sell, but it was funny, like these things happen in phases, right? Because as you're preparing, you kind of need to arm yourself with information, and the first time you get on biz buy sell is almost like nerve wracking, because you're like, okay, I don't even know what I'm doing here. I don't know what I'm looking for. But I was perusing and, eventually filtered down, some items, and saw, okay, within Denver, there's a ton of businesses, available, because I didn't want to move. That wasn't an option for me. I've got a wife and a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And so moving was not an option.
So was Biz Buy Sell also kind of a revelation? Because a lot of people have an aha moment where they actually go on and they can see literally businesses within a 10-mile radius of where they live that are for sale. The idea that there's a marketplace for businesses you can go buy. I love Biz Buy Sell to this day. Was that eye-opening for you?
Absolutely. And I'd heard of the concept of buying a business before, probably about 9 years prior. And, because I knew a guy that went out and bought like a janitorial services company. And to me, it just didn't sound very sexy. Like, why would I want to buy some business that's for sale, that's probably not going to be successful? It's, for sale for a reason. And I don't know anything, about how to do that. And, I think I just wasn't ready at the time from a, business maturity standpoint. But yeah, when I looked at it this time, I was thinking, I hadn't finished the book yet, and I hadn't listened to Acquiring Minds, the hundreds of hours that I've listened to since. And, so it was fascinating. Right. And, so I got vaguely familiar with it, but really I continued my education. I finished the book. I think I got the audio book. I listened to it twice, and it was like the best step-by-step guide for how to prepare you for that journey. And I mentioned before, like, there's a lot of focus in that book on building upstream deal flow and reaching out to brokers, and I remember after looking at Biz Buy Sell, the first thing that really caught my eye was this multi-site art gallery in Denver, Colorado. And I was like, I couldn't even believe it. I thought for sure it was going to be, one of these like small galleries in this part of town that, that I didn't want to operate a business in, because there's an area like that. And I did the, request more information, and learned that it was in Cherry Creek, which is, a really upscale business and entertainment district, in the center of Denver, just like 7 minutes from downtown. They've got hotels, restaurants, bars, salons, galleries, all sorts of, shops, and super high end, growing significantly. It's always been sort of the high end part of Denver, but now like more hotels and apartment complexes and condos are going in the area. So it's just skyrocketing right now. So I couldn't believe it was right in the heart of Cherry Creek, right at 3rd and Detroit. And so go ahead,
Sean. Let me jump in real quick. Actually, before we get into the story of your buying the gallery,
sure.
A little bit more on kind of as you approached it. So a number of my guests have used Rob's, but I'm interested that for you, it was like such a big unlock because basically you were looking at your financial picture and you weren't super liquid. So you didn't have a lot of cash. And in your own mind, you were like, well, I'm going to need this cash to buy a business. I'm going to need cash to buy a business. Even if I can finance it in some way, I probably need more cash than I have. But then your Rob's was pretty healthy. And so that was the difference for you. Because I feel like a lot of people who've been on, I may be wrong about this, but they decided they'd buy a business. And then they learned about this thing, Rob's, which is great. Oh, I can tap my 401k as well. But for you, it's like you wouldn't have proceeded if you didn't learn about the existence of Rob's and that you could access your 401k. Do I have that right?
Pretty much. I mean, that was the difference maker for me.
Okay. Great. And also, I just want to try to tease out what the difference in your mentality was today versus whatever it was 9 years ago when you heard about somebody buying a janitorial business. And at the time, it just was totally unappealing. And I think as you put it, like you weren't ready. And like now you were ready to hear something like that. Because, everybody who is listening to Acquiring Minds like gets it. But there's still a lot of people out there who don't get it. And it's like, why buy one of these old businesses? And it's just interesting. It's kind of binary. It's like it either really lands with you and you're like, yes, like, you and he who shall remain nameless, your buddy. It was an immediate, like an epiphany and so exciting. And yet 9 years before, and this is probably the case for many, many people still, like it didn't land on you at all. It was like, ugh, what do you think changed in you?
I've said to so many people, God, I wish I had done this 10 years prior, because I've listened, a lot of your listeners, I think are, so you got some maybe in your late 20s, but a lot of them are landing in their 30s. Right. And I have lots of jealousy, when I hear them talking about what they've done, because I think, God, I could have done this 10 years ago had I known about the Rob's transaction. But timing's everything, right? And I was in the point of my career where I thought I was going to, grow up and be a chief X officer of a tech company or a tech startup, right? And so that was my dream, right? We all have our dreams of, having some kind of like, financial windfall or exit or business success. And mine was to, eventually find, the right company, the right product or solution that I really loved and believed in, and help scale that into a global company. And so I think I was a bit blinded by that and blinded by the career climbing and the rat race. And once you're in that, it's hard to pull your head out of the sand and look around and see what's out there. So I think when I heard about the Rob's transaction, it made it real for me because I realized I've saved enough money. I could easily qualify, to buy a lot of these companies that I'm looking at, whereas before I didn't necessarily have that qualification, or know that I was qualified because I didn't know about the Rob's transaction. So I think part of it was my identification of, the opportunity that I had, that I could do it. Yeah. And also just, being a little bit more seasoned in business and, writing contracts and selling and doing everything that you do as you get into those upper echelons of the corporate world. So my friend, Jan and I, we talk about it all the time, how, our careers have prepared us for this point because a lot of the buying process, the acquisition process really wasn't that hard for us. It's stressful. There's a lot of work you have to do. There's late nights and, your deal's falling apart, 3 or 4 times throughout the process. And, but it wasn't hard. It wasn't anything that I hadn't necessarily, been able to do in terms of mind share before. So,
and why was that, Sean? Because you guys both had kind of had sales experience and sales at a pretty high level where you're signing contracts worth tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. So like you're used to kind of high stakes deals sort of thing?
Yeah, like deals for millions of dollars, and leading teams, across the country and across the world, and selling to seasoned executives and the C-suite, and managing critical operations or risk management areas for big companies. So it's like you're running parts of a business, right? You are running parts of a business, and as you move your career around, you get to experience another piece of scope that you maybe hadn't done before, and so it all starts to fit together. And personally, I look at myself, in my late 40s, being a bit late to the game. Maybe I'm just a late bloomer, here when I hear some of your 30 somethings on here, but it was the right timing for me, and that's what I guess I wanted to come back to, which is I tell people all the time I wish I had done this, but it really was the right timing for me, and it was an awakening, and it just became obvious, painfully obvious. I actually started telling, I had my in-laws in town for Christmas. I started telling them when they were still here, I think they left like around January 10th, around January 5th, guys, I'm going to buy a business, and this was, 4 days after my conversation with my friend. And, and I just started kind of rattling off the some of the basic stuff that I knew. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. And I also told that to my wife, and she was like, what are you talking about? She's like, okay, so you've been like, drinking all throughout the Christmas holiday, and now you want to buy a business? Okay, honey, we need to talk, But
you've been talking to Jan again.
Yeah, exactly. You've been talking to your good buddy again.
Well, Sean, on this point about wishing you'd started earlier, I'll spare you we shouldn't compare ourselves, because we all do, including me. But let's just indulge in comparing ourselves and in the reality that our egos exist. Look, man, you bought a $5 million business. Okay. So you're not 32, you're whatever, 46, 48, but you still, how many people can say they bought a $5 million business themselves and put that together and made that happen and now own this business? And you've got a lot of years left in your career, and you've learned this incredible skill of how to buy a business. It's such a valuable skill that you could very realistically do it again and again and again. So, and let's also not forget that the very point of ETA is that it's something of a shortcut. This is a 33-year-old business that you get to roll in and be owner of. So in some ways, you're way ahead. So I just say all that to put things in perspective.
No, thanks for the pep talk. I'll call you every day. And
that's what I'm here for, Sean.
Doggone it, people like me.
Yeah, that's right. Just call me Stuart Smalley, right? Okay. Well, let's get back to the plot here. Okay. The other last question I wanted to ask before you carry on about your search, as to the extent that it was kind of a search, was, it sounds like you were just kind of browsing Biz Buy Sell when you encountered the business that you now own. Was there any kind of other thesis that you had, or how well defined were your criteria? Let me put it that way. Yeah, you've already told us that you weren't going to move, so it had to be near Denver or in Denver.
Yeah, so the first time I got on Biz Buy Sell, I still didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have a thesis. I didn't have criteria or scope yet, and at that point it was still a bit intimidating to me because I didn't know what I was looking for. But I was just kind of browsing around and just looking at types of business, in my geography, and I will say it wasn't like super enticing because there's a lot of stuff on there, and but after I got through the book, after I reached out to eventually a dozen SBA lenders, and then finally got up the guts to call my first broker who had a deal that had the art gallery deal on Biz Buy Sell. Then I started filling in the blanks, right? Because each call was an education. Each call, I brought, the accumulation of the last call with somebody else, and I was filling in the blanks, and I was literally taking notes, in like OneNote, and and just, writing down everything that, I was learning that was like net new from previous conversations. And so I started building this, mass of knowledge, right? And, by the 12th call with an SBA lender, I got to the point where I could predict what they were going to say. And so I would be able to volunteer, the information before they'd have to ask, and I already knew what the, risk spots in my deal were. But, and so I'd highlight them before, they'd even be able, to ask them. So, it builds confidence, right? But you have to have the tenacity to keep doing it and to keep filling in the blanks and the curiosity and the guts, right? Those first few calls, I came out of the gate saying, "Hey, look, I'm a novice here. I need to use this as a learning opportunity. So I appreciate in advance, this conversation and all the, your willingness to kind of help me out here." And some of those early people that I spoke to, like Josh Level at Guidant and, some of the lenders that I spoke to, I feel like I made friends with them because they've become advisors, and I actually still keep in touch with them because I've got friends now, that I'm, kind of bringing along up the rears with the, the ETA. So I'm, making references and, I'm going out and meeting people that I met along the way, for lunch and it's great. It's really great. There's a lot of community in here, as across Biz Buy Sell and Search Funder and Acquiring Minds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, Sean. Okay, so let's get into the gallery now. That you tell us the listing, what you saw, what you liked. You've already said that it was in this great part of Denver that you knew was really that you were bullish about. And also, let's give it a name. What is the gallery called?
It's Fascination Street Fine Art.
What a great name, Fascination Street. So what else do you like about Fascination Street when you see the listing?
It's named after a Cure song, by the way. The founder really loved the Cure, so he named it after Fascination Street. So.
Well, I actually, cool. Good reminder, because when I Googled it earlier today, that's what comes up. And I was like, oh, this has to be more than a coincidence. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So Fascination Street is a business that's been around for 33 years in the Cherry Creek neighborhood. It was founded by my seller 33 years ago. At first he was an art dealer, and he was just into like collectibles and animation. And so we, hung out a shingle, got an office somewhere in Denver, and eventually this kind of morphed into not just animation and collectibles, but fine art. He felt like, I think his first fine art acquisition from an artist is an artist named Thomas Arvid, who does this amazing photorealistic wine art. And, so it's paintings of like high-end wine bottles and glasses and from different perspectives. And it's incredible. And this was where my seller, made his first purchase. And that was his first foray into fine art. And I think he saw the potential in that. So that's really, where, 95% of his business, started growing around. And, he got in the space that we're in maybe 15, 16 years ago. It's at the corner of East 3rd Avenue in Detroit in Cherry Creek and Cherry Creek North. He bought these 3 parcels in the same building on the same floor and connected them in the back. So he blew out the walls in the back, connected them. And so now it's one gallery with 3 parcels. So it makes it a really nice walkthrough, right? Because there are like 2 really large gallery sections on the both ends, and then in the middle there's a frame shop, which is something that one of his more recent add-ons, and probably 2 or 3 years ago. So we've got a fully functioning frame shop. We've got a really large gallery, about 6,000 square feet of space, and it's a nice journey, from one end to the other to see all the different art that's in there. And we probably represent 30 to 40 artists today. They are all nationally acclaimed artists. They are contemporary artists, so all of them are alive today. So we don't have any masters. Don't have. We might have a couple pieces of modern art, but it's really focused on contemporary artists, and And the business model is such that, or the qualification is that, these artists need to be represented in other high-end fine art galleries. And that's the qualification. And so we'll look at them, we'll see who's representing them, and obviously we need to curate based on taste and theme, and then we'll add them to the collection if they're not already represented in Denver or Colorado. Because in the art business, there's a lot of exclusivity with galleries. So you might have a up and coming artist who latches on to a high-end gallery in New York City, and they want exclusive representation, which means that artist cannot go in another gallery. But most of them can be represented, by 200 square mile, geography or something. So I could have an artist that's represented by another gallery in Aspen or Vail by a different gallery.
Mm-hmm. But it does give you basically geographic exclusivity in
You've got to
your
have
local
it.
market.
Yeah, you've got to have it. There are at least like 4 or 5 other galleries in Cherry Creek, and there's no crossover, and that's by design.
And so does that mean that those other 4 or 5 galleries you're very competitive with? Like you guys really kind of duke it out? Because I assume, there's only so many artists in the world that are kind of experience pull-through demand by collectors. And so you guys are really fighting to be the exclusive local dealer, effectively, or distributor, or whatever, I guess, or gallery for those artists. So it probably makes it a less than collegial experience with your fellow gallery owners.
That's not how I view it, actually. And the one thing that I've learned in my journey is that there are many different echelons of the art industry. Mm-hmm. You've got your Heritage House, Sotheby's, auctions, in London, New York City, Hong Kong, and then there's probably a couple tiers below that of really high end art dealing, and they're trading in Picassos and Miro's and Salvador Dali and a lot of Renoir in masters, right? And they're auctioning them, 50 million here, 100 million there. And that's a totally different space, right? And then, so every gallery has kind of a unique curation, and they create an identity for themselves. So I would say to some degree, yes, there's some healthy competition with the galleries in my neighborhood, but I literally was in one of them yesterday while I was waiting to get a coffee. 2 weeks ago, I went in one of the other ones to just go in and introduce myself and try to get to know some of the staff and learn a thing or two from them, and invite them out to lunch. And they invited me to one of their events that weekend. So it's very collegial. If there were a gallery that I competed with, it probably wouldn't be like that. But I would say the galleries I compete with, where we have a lot of overlap in artists, those are spread out across the country. Those galleries are, in Key West and Fort Lauderdale and Las Vegas and Laguna Beach and LA. And there are, maybe, half dozen to 10, galleries across the country that, we compete for deals. But another surprising thing about the gallery business is, it's not fully dependent on walk-in traffic, right? I am blessed by the fact that I have a space in like the best neighborhood of Denver, and I get quality walk-in traffic, and people have spending money to buy art, and they have the interest. But we've structured the business in such a way that a lot of the business is online, right? And a lot of the business is done through advertising who you have, and making sure that you're able to capture those leads, before other galleries do. So I think there are other galleries that know about Fascination Street, and they feel like they're a competitor because we are hustling to get those leads.
That's fascinating. So a lot of the kind of the business is internet based, because one of my big questions about the business is like, what does the internet do to a business like this, or what did it do years ago, and what does it mean today? And I want to do a deep dive into more of how the business works in a minute, but I want to catch the plot up to you as owner. Can you give us some numbers that you saw there in the listing? Like give us a sense of size of business.
It was a 4.2 million revenue business last year, and that had a net net income of about 584K. But there was roughly another, 500K of ad backs and, owners' salaries and owner benefits, SDE. So really the SDE was around 1.1 million. And at the end of the day, we did a valuation of 5.3 million, which included 1.4 million of inventory. And so when I look at the multiple, Will, like I look at the multiple, the calculation for me was because inventory in the art gallery business is so much more significant than if you're buying a janitorial services, home services company, right? You need some working capital, you need some inventory, but really the inventory is the lifeblood of the gallery business, and also makes it a little bit more risky and interesting when I'm having these conversations with banks trying to get a loan, because you don't see a lot of art galleries come across, and all these banks, saw that as a nuance. Some were kind of interested in it, and others just sort of said, yeah, this is so out of our typical basket of deals that we're not sure. And so back to my calculation, I kind of looked at it like the valuation at 5.3 million. I subtracted 1.4 million of inventory, and I got to like a $3.9 million business, without the inventory. Mm-hmm. So when you look at SDE of 1.2 million, let's say, the multiple is around 3.25x, and that's how I see it. And that looked like a good multiple for me, a little bit of a premium when you consider, the inventory. But again, the inventory is different with the art gallery business.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Sean, I mean, the thing that jumps out at me is that an art gallery owner can take home $1 million a year. Like, we just don't think of these as businesses that could do that well. When I think of, but I'm ignorant of it, so what do I know? But I think of an art gallery business as a passion business, as somebody who's maybe an artist themselves, maybe kind of adjacent to kind of a bed and breakfast or restaurant, or something that somebody founds in retirement or because they're passionate. Your seller may well have been somebody like that, but never one that has a lot of financial potential. Indeed, many of them just struggle to survive, if they survive at all. So the fact that this gallery is doing basically, when you add back everything, over $1 million in SDE just blows my mind. Did it blow your mind? Did you have the same kind of wrong intuition about these businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially you do think it's a sleepy business, and honestly, when I tell my friends and some of my family members, I'm going to buy an art gallery, everyone's shocked, because I think they have in their mind, this paradigm of an art gallery that is a sleepy business with, a single person, sitting behind a desk that may or may not get up and talk to you when you come in.
Exactly.
And, yes. And you just look around, they say, oh, are you looking to fill a space on your wall? And, however that goes. And always empty, like there's nobody else in there except empty. The person sitting behind the desk. Yeah. Yeah. And, but that's not this business. This business is, with the 6,000 square feet, we have a lot of inventory, and we proudly show as much of that inventory as possible. But we also have an upstairs, I have an upstairs office, which is like an apartment, and that apartment is all art storage. So we have hundreds of paintings, that are in storage. And so we're constantly rotating the inventory and rehanging the gallery. At least once a month, we have an art exhibition. An artist comes in and does a show for a couple days, usually on a Friday night for 3 hours, and then a Saturday afternoon for 3 or 4 hours. And they come and, they meet the collectors, they do dedications on the back of the painting, or they'll sign things, take pictures. And that really, helps connect, the people and the collectors, with the art itself, because the artist can tell them the stories. And ultimately that is the job of us as a sales team, to connect people with the art, right? You can come in and you can view something But if you don't really understand the technique or the background or all the obstacles that the artist overcame to get to this point, it doesn't mean as much. And then when you're able to personalize it with something that they see when they're on vacation here in Denver, and it's a memory for them, or it reminds them of their dog that they had 10 years ago, whatever it is, right? You've got to connect people to the art. And kind of getting back to your question, though, the business is built in such a way that it's about generating leads online and driving people to the website. And when they come to the website, what we want them to do is peruse the art, and they're usually coming because they've Googled an artist, and that's why it's important for us to have a famous artist. So they're Googling an artist that they're looking for and that they're interested in. And we do a good job of making sure that we're coming up in one of those like top 3 or 4 options for them to click on. And once they do, they come to the website, they look at the art, and most artists in this space, in commercial fine art, do not want prices published on the website. So they need to click inquire for price, send their email, send their phone number, and then that generates an incoming lead. It generates an auto response to the recipient, and then it generates an incoming lead to my team. And I have 4 sales consultants at the gallery that are dedicated to, responding to these leads, and also to responding to walk-in traffic. But I'd say
that's a lot. That's a big sales team. I mean, how many leads a day are you getting that you need 4 people to service them?
Well, it's not 4 every day, right? We have a schedule rotation, right? But ideally, we've got at least 2 sales consultants in there every day, right? And the way the gallery is structured is I have 2 gallery directors, and I also call them sales consultants because they're responsible for selling. But I have a gallery director, assistant gallery director, and then I have 1 full-time sales consultant. I have another resource who's kind of a hybrid role where she's a sales consultant, the frame shop manager, and also what we call gallery assistant. And then I have 2 gallery assistants, and the gallery assistants, their role is really focused on, receiving incoming inventory, making sure that we're updating our systems, our website, our inventory software, and, packing and shipping items. And they're also my marketing team at this point. So that was one of my newest hires. I looked for a gallery assistant that was willing to roll their sleeves up and do, all of the hard work of rehanging the gallery and doing inventory, packing and shipping. But also I was looking for social media excellence and video content creation, because I think one of the big growth areas that I have in the business, number one, if you go to the website, which is fascinationstart.com for Fascination Street Art. If you go there, the website is from 2004, right? It is a good symbol of early 2000s websites, and which for me was good and bad coming into the deal, because if the revenue is what it is and the profit margin is what it is today, and I'm able to modernize that website, make it so much more aesthetically pleasing and functional, I've got a big growth opportunity ahead of me. So that's something that we've been working on, and back to social media. The team had previously done a really good job of, uploading photos on, Instagram or Facebook, and the website, that we have of the art, to promote it. But we weren't doing anything that was like sticky, nothing in the kind of short form video that you see in TikTok or Instagram Reels. And so now we're starting to experiment. We put out our first TikTok a couple weeks ago. We're very proud of that. I think we've got 4 or 5 of those, and that may or may not be, the ultimate consumer that I'm going after, but part of the marketing approach is really getting the brand out there, the name, the familiarity, both locally and nationally. So, that's just one of the tools, but we're also going to be, updating the website significantly as we get into 2024.
So, Sean, it was $4.2 million a year in sales, right? That's what it was. Right. So that divided by 12 is what? $350,000 a month, something like that?
Exactly.
So $350,000 a month in art. I mean, so can I ask what your median sale price is for a piece? Just give us a perspective. I guess what I'm looking for, of course, is how many units are you selling per week?
That's a good question. I think the last I looked, we had sold, up to maybe 180, 190 pieces so far this month, right? So one thing that we also do well with, I think, is offer lower priced items that are affordable for people that are walking in the gallery, and maybe they're not ready to buy an $8,000 original canvas, or they're not able to buy a $102,000 bronze life-size sculpture of an elephant. I say life-size; it's not really life-size, but that's what we call it because it's really large. That weighs 350 pounds, and so we have small sculptures, and we have prints, and we have hanging sculptures and pieces that can range between $200 to $1,000, and we do really well with that. So I'd say our average sale price is probably between $2,000 to $3,000, but we do go all the way up to our largest piece that we sold recently was $102,000. It was that elephant. So,
wow. And so what percentage of that revenue is coming from online, basically? And you're not e-commerce, let's be clear, because it's kind of e-commerce. So you get a lead online, but then it sounds like it's a very kind of human, like your sales consultants probably have a conversation. And obviously the higher price the item is, the more likely there is to be a conversation. You don't have prices listed online, so there needs to be some kind of interaction. So does that take place mostly over email or over calls, or it depends, or what?
Yeah, it does depend, but I would say it's kind of a hybrid process between digital and human intervention. And frankly, I'd love to increase the digital percentage of that pie chart.
Yeah.
But that's going to take time, and the original way of doing business in the art gallery is somebody walks in, likes a piece, you negotiate, and then you arrange for handover or shipping, right? So for us, it's creating the digital footprint and awareness out there that we have the pieces that people are interested in, bringing them to the website. And then when they reach out to us via the website, that's when the human intervention begins, and that process begins, and it takes place depending on the buyer, right? It takes place over email, takes place over the phone, and sometimes there's a little negotiation there. Some galleries don't discount, and some do. We do discount, but we try to hold those discounts to 10%, right? And but it also depends on the artist. And it depends on the margin, for the artist, that we're buying from, or from the publisher that we buy from. So publishers are like, think of them as like an agency that represents multiple artists. And and we get certain buying terms from the publishers and from the artists. So some are better than others. So that'll drive what we're willing to discount.
So on the pie chart of where your revenue comes from, like, what, 80, 90% of that is online leads?
I'd say it's probably closer to like 70, 75.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's just trying to understand, like, to what extent this is a brick and mortar business. You do a lot, it sounds like, to, as you said, to kind of establish the local community, a connection between the artist and the local community. So you have these events monthly, at least, where the artist is actually coming in and doing an exhibition. You've got this great space in a great neighborhood in Denver. You've done a frame shop now, which maybe let's hear a little bit about that. But all of this feels like a brick and mortar business that's trying to bring people in. And that's doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, that it's only brick and mortar or only e-commerce. But it's interesting because a lot of the effort, it seems, is bringing people in and yet well over a majority of the revenue is e-commerce. It's not a critique. I'm literally just trying to understand the business. I find it so interesting. We should probably get back to your story and stop with all the academic questions about how the innards of the business works. But as I said, I'm very interested. Tell us why the seller did the frame shop inside, and do you think that was a good strategic move? I guess you got to say yes because you got employees who work in it.
Yeah, no, I'll say yes, but I believe in my answer. Look, last year I think the frame shop did around $130 something, and this year we're already up, 50% from last year, same time last year. So it was a great idea.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's burgeoning, right? Because when you sell art, if it's a painting, a print, people are going to need to frame that, right? So why not be the one-stop shop for that, right? Unless it's already pre-framed, which sometimes we get those, but so yeah, it's actually one of the major growth levers that I have right now. That and increasing the digital experience with a new website and branding with social media. So the frame shop's been great. We've got the frame shop manager who is the hybrid role. She does a few things, and then we had a lead framer and 2 framers also up there. So we have basically, 4 people running the frame shop operation. I had to let one of the framers go last week. So we've got a lead framer and a framer kind of doing all of the bulk of the hard work, putting together the frames, stretching the canvas, putting it, together in a gallery wrapped frame and then framing it to the customer's specifications.
Well, as I hear you talk about that, it strikes me, frame shops, of course, are their own type of business, and many frame shops are just frame shops. Yeah, they have a few pieces of art on the walls that you can buy, but that's not where the vast majority of their revenue is coming from. But it seems like this hybrid where you have a frame shop within a high-end gallery is a great combination because, it's kind of like the whole is more than the sum of the parts. Like both sides of the business complement each other beautifully. So that's great. And I assume you are selling framing to people who are not just buying art from you. You'll
Absolutely.
Get people off the street or whatever.
Absolutely. And that's on my to-do list right now too, is to really begin, marketing that business, independently, right? We've actually branded it separately. We call it Denver Custom Frames. But when you come into the gallery, people often ask like, "Oh, is this frame shop separate?" Because you could walk right into it through one of the corridors. But we are going to put a big push into branding it separately. Come here to get your photography framed, your pieces framed, your collections of things that you want. Put into a like a big box frame or something, like I saw like a bunch of Michael Jordan rings, come in the other day with a Michael Jordan Nike Air, shoe. And so people bring in all sorts of stuff and we're trying to make a big push for that. And I think what we're lucky about, and this was no accident, was that there was a frame shop in the building years ago, and my seller basically capitalized on when they closed their shop down, he opened one up and kind of piggybacked on some of the clientele that might have known there was a frame shop there, right? So it is clever. My seller was quite clever and how he thought to expand the business, and he did a great job over 30 years. So.
Well, speaking of the seller, let's get back to the deal itself. So thank you for your transparency and sharing all the numbers. You used your raw, give us kind of what did the terms of the deal look like? Because I know there were hiccups, to say the least.
Yeah. Before getting to that, I want to just tell you about like leading up to, the first LOI. Like one of the cool things that I did with, my friend Jan that I mentioned was once I got caught up on, the book and, acquiring minds and biz buy sell, I started, we started talking every day, right? We started like exchanging notes every day, talking. And so he was kind of ahead of me, right? But I was coming up right behind him. But he was also kind of right behind another one of his friends, a guy that he had worked with, at a bank previously. And that guy was ahead of Jan. His name was Dan. And he joined an accelerator called Acquira, which I'm sure you're familiar with, an incubator for ETA. And so the three of us started a pod, right? We got on a text chain together, and we just started sharing information left and right. And I have to say, like, this was one of the most instrumental, parts of the journey that was so helpful, because we had each other. If one of us didn't know the answer, we'd just text into our group, and we'd have like answers and ideas and, different strategies, coming back right away. And I know a lot of people are doing that through, Search Funder and other communities. But, this little intimate group was so helpful. And we even like, we were sharing like SBA lender contacts, and we all used the same attorney, a guy named Jeff Bachman at Aegis Law, who was incredible, by the way. I highly recommend him. He did, for all of us, he did a flat rate through the process of $20K from LOI to close. And, based on my research and talking to some other attorneys, that was a really good deal, because a lot of attorneys were quoting a certain percentage of the deal price. And, I was looking at, 30 to 40,000 potentially, had I gone with another attorney. And, his rates may have changed, since the $20K flat rate, but he was smart, uber focused on limiting my risk. And you need an attorney that really does a great job of breaking down all of the contract, lengthy contract legal clauses into understandable notes, so you can make educated decisions about how you're going to manage your risk in the deal. So,
and do you think that having this pod with Dan and Jan, because you guys knew each other and that it was kind of intimate, was more valuable than, say, just asking questions on Search Funder and Twitter? I think you've already answered that, but expand, please.
Yeah, 100%. Like I actually didn't know Dan. We both knew Jan, so Jan was the connector. But yeah, it was personal. It was intimate. It was timely, right? I could put a question into our text group, and there was a commitment to answer. We were all supporting each other, right? So it wasn't putting it out into the ether and, hoping that someone would come back with a good response, in a couple days. It was same day responses. And we also used it as a venting room, a crying towel, right? Because a lot of us went through, many times during our deal where the SBA lender backed out, or, something really critical threatened the deal. And we could vent and, try to help each other. But more importantly, help each other come up with negotiation strategies to get out of those issues, right? And to come up with something net new. And Dan had great ideas. He had such a treasure trove from his incubator that he was giving us templates and our attorney and but Jan and I also had many more years of business experience too that we could offer throughout the process. And it was I would highly recommend reaching out, trying to find people that are, on the ETA path. And, if you can even time, where you are on your timeline as well. We were so lucky. I think Dan closed his deal, let's say at the end of April. I closed my deal June 1st. And then I think Jan closed his mid-July. So, there were 6 weeks before me and 6 weeks after me. So we were all just going through the same stuff in many ways.
Well, I would just want to emphasize, because one of the things that my guests say over and over and over about what makes the search hard is the emotional toll, and that it's extremely lonely. You're doing this weird thing. Often your family doesn't get it. Your friends don't get it. Your old business colleagues don't get it. And then A, the loneliness, B, the roller coaster the inevitable disappointments of broken deals, etc. So between loneliness and disappointment and severe ups and downs, it's if you can, to kind of make this a little clinical, like those are kind of the problems of search. Those are some of the key problems of search. And if you can kind of alleviate or even eliminate those problems in a peer group, particularly as you said, with people who are kind of going through, if you can line up the timing, amazing. You're really, I guess, kind of making the search much more bearable.
100%. 100%. And the process is, like you said, it is lonely, and not everybody understands what you're trying to do. And, I told my friends I'm buying an art gallery, and I get a mix of responses. Some people would say, "Oh my God, that's so awesome. You're following your passion." And, they were just supportive, I think, from an emotional standpoint, but I told my dad, and he was like, "You've got, bigger cojones than I do, good luck with that." It's like, so it's like not super encouraging. And then you tell others and they come back and they say, "Oh, okay. Well, I never pictured that for you, but, okay, good." And I think they think that it's like a big sleepy business. So it's a mix of responses. It is lonely. And, but I will say, like, you oscillate during that process almost every day, from moments of panic, to because of the like financial risk that you're taking on. I'm liquidating a large part of my retirement account, and my logic was that this money that I've been saving for 25 years is going to maybe grow at 7% per year for each year, if I'm lucky, for the next like 20 years until I retire. And that's great. Maybe it, grows 40 to 50%, 1.4 or whatever it is, in 20 years. But that's not game changing. And I am much more aspirational than that in terms of what I'd like, as I get older, and, I've got young kids now, and I want to be able to, give them experiences. And so I wanted to be able to put that money to use, right? So there's a huge risk, but I want to use that retirement money now. And when I learned that there are no IRS penalties, there's no tax that you pay on it. I mean, you basically, the way it works is, and we didn't talk about this, but
yeah,
the way it works is, you go to a company like Guidant, who I went through, and you pay a, typically $5,000 fee. And what they do is they set up a C Corp for you. By IRS regulations, it has to be a C Corp. And there are, some considerations with that, because if you look up double taxation with C Corp, you can, learn that, the corporation pays taxes as well as the employees, but there are ways to manage it. But they create a C Corp. They also create a 401k plan for your C Corp. And the way it works is that you roll the money over from your IRA or your 401k into this 401k plan that they set up. And it's usually with, I think, Seattle Bank. And that money is then sitting in that 401k plan. And from there, you work with a Guidant to do all the documentation, and they create stock certificates. So they actually issue stock for your company. And anything that you're rolling over then becomes owned technically by the 401k plan of your C Corp. And then once that's all done, you monetize that by basically transferring it and wiring it into your business checking account. So, and at that point, it becomes liquid, but it's highly governed what you do with that money, right? You can't go out and buy a marijuana store. You can't go out and, just do a whole bunch of things with Airbnb. You can't acquire, properties that maybe you would eventually use for Airbnb, but there are rules, and you have to know what they are to avoid any kind of down the road complications with IRS. And then what Guidant does is, there's obviously a lot of compliance that comes with that. So they do an annual, compliance filing for you. So you're paying them, throughout the year to get that service. But it's, it was the way to make everything possible for me. And, but getting back to like, the loneliness and the risk and everything, like you go through this process and you have the ups and downs, and the loneliness and the moments of risk panic, I think is balanced by this horizon of opportunity. This looking at these financial figures, and you say to yourself, if I can keep this business rolling in the way that I see it performing in the last 12 months or 24 months, then, and I've done my pro forma, my business plan to be, conservative enough and maybe even account for some downside as I'm, trying to take over the business and dealing with, employees coming and going. You've got to be honest with yourself about, the conservative numbers or liberal numbers that you build, but it's invigorating, right? The opportunity there is like invigorating. And every day that you're paying your loan to your bank or to your seller, you are acquiring more equity in that business, right? So, whatever the term
you're
of
paying
your loan
yourself
is,
in a way.
paying yourself, exactly. So with a lot of interest, unfortunately, and especially in this environment, but you're paying yourself. And, at the end of that 10-year term, that's your $5 million, right? That of equity, when you close out those loans, right? Assuming you do it in 10 or maybe you do it in less, but that's your equity. And then everything, in theory becomes gravy in terms of your net income, right? Or your SDE. So it's, you counterbalance between these highs and these lows. And, one day you're literally thinking, am I going to, run my retirement and my future into the ground? What am I doing? What the hell is this risk? And it's funny because you go through this process of M&A, right? The acquisition process, and you have to learn that, and thank you to Walker Diable, thank you to you and others out there in the HBR study, which is the second Bible of how to do this. But you kind of think you're a total stud as you're getting through this process. And by the time you get to the closing table, your family's patting you on the back and people are buying you a bottle of champagne, you sign the papers and you think you are a Goliath, you are a titan of business and industry, right? And it's the peak of everything. And then you wake up the next morning and you think, what the hell did I just do? Now I've got this huge loan payment. I have this huge rent payment. I have 10 souls that work for me that I need to make sure I'm taking care of and promoting and I've got to grow this business. And you don't sleep for a week at least. I've talked to Jan and myself, like I was waking up at 3-4 in the morning and just not able to go back to sleep, for at least 10 days after buying the business. And going into that operate mode, you do feel for a little while, like, if I'm being honest, like a little bit of imposter syndrome, and like a deer in headlights, right? Because you're just trying to take on the business. You're trying to transfer accounts from the seller to yourself. You're spending more time on customer service calls with vendors and with providers and merchant services accounts than, and phone companies and cable companies than you ever wanted to. But, that goes away. And then you start to get into the rhythm of the business and you slowly start, learning how to run that business. And I think for me, one of the big takeaways is making sure that you really trust your seller and that you establish a rapport with him or her during that buying process. Do not do this all through the broker. At some point, when you get into the deal, you've got to insist with the seller's broker that you are meeting that seller and that you're, going to that person's place of business after hours, to avoid, discovery from the employees. Somehow you're meeting them and getting to know that person, learning about the business, asking, questions during the due diligence process. And you've got to have a good relationship because I think establishing that for me has been just so uber critical for me over the last 4 months. So I took it over June 1st. I'm almost 4 months into the business, and my seller and I, we've transformed our relationship, from him constantly telling me what needs to be done to, a friendship and a trust. And he sees that I'm putting in the work, and he sees that I'm learning, and he sees that I know what I'm doing. And he's going to be a consultant of mine for at least, 6 months. And we may do, a phone call contract for the second 6 months. But, without that trust between each other, I think it's a much scarier road.
Trust also helps getting the deal done, because the deals, there's a newsletter I subscribe to, Guesswork Investing, and he talks about coming from private equity into small business acquisition land. He was a searcher, he bought a business, and how in both private equity and down here in small business acquisition land, it's not, he refers to the cliche, time kills all deals. And he's like, it's worse than that. Deals want to die. They are looking for a reason to die. They are trains careening down a track that at any moment are just going to jump the track. And your job is to take this unwieldy beast and just do everything you can to keep it on the track. And so as we all know, deals die 3 times before they get across the finish line, and so on. And the more trust you have with your seller, the better, the more likely you are to survive that process. What did that look like between you and your seller? Because I know that there were some fits and starts.
Yeah. So, I'll get into the building trust first, and then get into the deal dying a few times. So on the topic of trust, the way that it worked for me and my seller initially was that when I put in my LOI, on the same day, his broker told me, and I thought this was a ruse, by the way. I thought this was like a selling negotiation tactic. He told me that another offer had just come in the day before. And this is after this business had been on the market for 5 to 6 months. So I thought, this is like kind of convenient timing. This is probably not real, but I had to take it at face value, right? So that impacted, the monetary value of my offer and everything. But ultimately, it came down to us doing a meet the owner event. So the other buyer candidate met the owner, and I met the owner, and we came, to the gallery separately after hours to meet with him, and just, talk about who we were and what we wanted to do with the business, learn a little bit more about the business. And another thing like that, I felt like I went out on a limb a little bit, but I gave him like my 60-second like heartfelt speech about why I was doing this, and what my goals were, what I wanted to accomplish, that it was ultimately for the benefit of my wife and my 2 children, and for them to spend more time with their daddy as they get older, so I could take over the business, really work hard for several years, and slowly begin to take myself out of the business when I tweak it and get it where I want to. And the buyer or the seller since shared with me that the other buyer candidate was significantly more well capitalized than I was. There would be a lot more money down, but it was the vibe that he got. It was the familiarity with the family story. And mine was authentic, right? I'm not suggesting to be inauthentic, but he connected with that, and he turned down another buyer that could have been an easier transaction, because we had our bumps along the way, and a lot of it was related to my financing. So, that's my advice for searchers out there, is to really find a way to connect with your seller, and insist with the seller's broker that you have the opportunity to meet with the seller, and not just do all the negotiation through attorneys and through the broker. Like, he and I had lots of one-on-one conversations at the end of the deal where things were looking sour at certain points, and he and I had lots of one-on-one conversations where he and I came up with clever ideas to solve a problem, right? And credit to the seller, he came up with a lot of those, and so did I. And but by the time we established this relationship that was open, he was more than willing to acquiesce to some of my asks that he probably wouldn't have earlier in the process, because he's a tough negotiator. And it was not an easy negotiation or process, but I think towards the end, we both wanted the deal for each other.
And can you share the terms of the deal?
So originally the LOI was a purchase price of 4.9 million. That included 1 million of inventory. It was going to be, about 4.4 million of cash at closing, between, me and an SBA lender. I offered, $10,000 of earnest money in good faith, just to show that I was, willing to stick into the deal. I asked for a 10% seller note of about 490K, and offered, I think, a generous 7.5% interest rate on that seller note just to sweeten the deal. 7.5 was generous at the time. Interest rates have gone up since, but at the time I learned that other seller notes were offering 1 to 1.5 points less than what I offered. That kind of came back to bite me because that rate kept going up. So I wish I had anchored at a lower rate, but and I asked for obviously exclusivity to ensure that the seller wasn't entertaining any other deals, and taking it off biz buy sell, which I think is pretty standard. And he came back and asked for a $150,000 earnest money deposit, which everyone, all attorneys and I think his broker maybe too, everyone was a little surprised by that. But he really wanted to get me stuck into the deal. And it was interesting because he wanted, to me really to show that sign of good faith, but that created a lot of downstream issues because our negotiations subsequent to that really was more around, am I going to lose this earnest money, if the deal falls apart? So it was all about what date we were setting, where the earnest money goes hard and it's no longer accessible to me despite what happens with the deal. And we probably spinned our wheels for a long, long time with attorneys and attorneys' fees on his side. I had a flat rate, just trying to navigate this, right? So we eventually settled on like a $100,000 earnest money deposit, and we figured out how to make it work. And ultimately he bent on some of the terms related to it. But and then I had an SBA lender. After interviewing 12, I found one that was solid, and they were going to give me a prime plus 1.5% variable, interest rate, which was pretty good considering that I think the standard offer from SBA lenders is about prime plus 2.5. That's kind of like, top shelf, bottom shelf, whatever you want to call it. That's the standard offer that they're making. And if you can cut that down to 1.5, then you're doing okay. There were some other flat rates that were available out there, in the 8s, but a little harder to get. And my SBA lender at some point during the deal said, you know what, you've got too much blue sky or airball in your deal, where I just didn't have enough collateral to satisfy the loan. And that's even taking into account, a life insurance policy that they were requiring me to take out. So they came back and said, we need to increase the seller note from, 490K to about 1 million, so he's in for 20%. And, and this didn't sit well with the seller, because we thought that the deal was starting to shape up, right? So the seller started to get fairly frustrated with the SBA lender at this point, but he asked for a few things and eventually, bent to the 20%. So we agreed on a $1 million seller note. And then he came back and, asked for a higher percentage interest on that increased value that he'd be loaning, which the logic follows. So we agreed on an 8% interest instead of 7.5. And, and then towards the end, we got to a point where, we needed to change the deal up a little bit, and the SBA lender started to show him the maybe 3 or 4 days before closing, showed him the fine print on how the seller note would be subordinated to the SBA loan, and it basically read, this is all standard language from the SBA. So, anybody that's going into this, you need to be aware that this could be a gotcha with the seller. But basically, it says that, his seller note if I stopped paying it, but I was paying the SBA loan, he would have no recourse, right? And I think my seller's like fear was that, after 7 years, he would have no legal recourse, and if I were still paying my SBA loan, and that I could just stiff him ultimately. And it's really not how things work, but that was his fear, and so he killed the deal at the 11th hour. He killed the deal. I was actually out to dinner with two of my friends, celebrating that I was about to sign closing, in a day or two, and I got a text from him, and he said, we've got an emergency. This deal is dead.
Wow.
So I left the dinner. I'm outside calling him, asking him, and he was upset, but he wasn't upset at me.
At least he reached out to you.
Yeah,
because a lot of people, a lot of sellers, when they want to kill the deal, they ghost you.
Yeah. And his attorney hadn't done an SBA deal as well. He had a very qualified, experienced attorney who was very good, but I think he was more experienced doing private equity sized deals and never dealing with SBA. It was his first SBA one, and he even advised his client, don't do this deal. I can't recommend, if you stop doing this deal, I can't represent you. And so so they were kind of two peas in a pod at that point. And so he said, look, I'm going out of town right now. I need the weekend to think about it. And, I still want to do the deal, but I just don't know how we're going to get it done. So that left me with 2 days of absolute abject, disappointment and brokenheartedness. And, but he came back on
Crying
Monday.
on the shoulder of your pod.
Yeah. Texting.
Using that pod.
Texting my pod, and I got those same texts from those guys when they went through it too. But he came back the next week, a little refreshed, had some time to think on it. And he basically came back and he offered me two options. One was a 100% seller carry, 100% seller note. Not 100% of the 5.3, but 100% of whatever loan that I needed to get there. And he said, or, and this could be an interesting option. I am willing to, be your partner for 2 years, and you can buy in equity, and I'll be your partner, and we can work together. And then, over the course of 2 years, we can, part ways, and, we'll have a loan, and maybe you'll have an SBA loan, or, maybe it'll be a seller note at that point, but you can continue to buy up your equity. And, I thought, honestly, I was really impressed that he came up with those ideas and that he offered that. And I was honored that he was willing to work with me as a business partner in that kind of a relationship. And I told him as much. And, but I knew immediately when he offered the business partnership that was not what I wanted to do, because you've got to come into this knowing what your goals are, right? And what your desired outcome is. And my goals were to be my own boss, and to, have my own business, and to be, responsible for everything in the business, to learn it inside out, and not to buy a new job, right? I know that's something a lot of people talk about is, trying to avoid buying a new job. And so, I politely declined the partnership offer, but I was a little intimidated by doing, the seller carry for, the balance of everything for the loan. But because I would be so intrinsically tied to him, because he is, now he's my landlord, he's my bank, and he's my consultant, right? So we are very, our success is now mutually intertwined, which is good, but it's a very tightly wound relationship, right? So I took him up on it, and we got the deal dusted off. We kind of had to go back to the attorneys and say, all right, we've got a fairly decent restructure of the deal here. All other things notwithstanding, we just need to change, some of these, loan sections in the deal. And I had to go out and get different types of insurances and pledge him some security interest in the business if I were to ever, fail on, paying the loan. And so, he definitely wrapped it pretty tightly around me in terms of, my commitment to make him whole in the event that something didn't work out. But we figured it out, right? And at the end of the day, the final deal structure was a total loan of 5.31 million. And at this point, the inventory went from 1 million to 1.4 million because during my process that they told me that there's actually more inventory. There was actually another 600K of inventory, but I said that, I couldn't take all that on. So we whittled it down to 400K, and I had to decide, on some pieces and some artists that I didn't want to bring in. But I had a seller note of 3.91 million at 9% interest starting on June 1st. And then, for that extra 400K, he gave me a little bit of extra time to kind of swallow that pill. So we set up a second seller note of 400K at 9% interest that would start on October 1st. So I'm a few days away from doing that second note. And then I did a self-funded equity injection of $1 million. And that included, my $100,000 earnest payment. And I had to get, an insurance policy and pledge, security in the business if some of that didn't work out.
So you had around $1 million in your 401k.
I did. I had a little bit more than that, but that was a large bulk of it.
And so this really, I think you said it earlier, but this is going really all in.
All in, 100% in.
And what does your dad say now that you're on the other side of the transaction?
I think he's still, waiting for the shoe to drop, I guess, one way or another. But ultimately, I am happy beyond belief. It is everything that I had hoped it was going to be.
And what is that, Sean? What makes you so happy?
I went from, jobs where you have significant daily work stress, and you have, when you work in a big corporation, you have a highly matrixed organization typically. And you may have a manager who is called your boss, but you really are accountable to dozens and dozens of people, right? And you don't always control the amount of work that is being asked of you, right? We're all, very reactive, and you don't control the funnel of business, especially in sales. So that was a lot of daily stress that I was doing for other people. And it was really a grind. And for me, as I've gotten older and maybe more set in my ways, or maybe just more confident, or maybe just more stubborn, I was started to reject that completely. And, so this new premise of really me being the boss, me driving the tempo, everything that I'm doing is for my family. It's for our future success. There's a lot more motivation there. There's a lot more willingness to, roll your sleeves up and get into it. Like we talked about earlier, every payment that you're making is, you're really paying yourself in equity. So it was a no-brainer for me. And while I will say that there is a larger kind of overhanging umbrella of burden, financial risk out there, it's manageable because I did the due diligence on the business, and the business is performing as I expected. It's not like breaking any records right now, but it's doing what I need it to do. And we are having fun with it. The team and I have really bonded and created a strong relationship. I've got really smart people in the gallery, and I learn from them every day, which coming from corporate business world, coming to a gallery, I thought that, I'm going to be able to teach them everything. And, but they are teaching me everything. And I'm loving the process of learning. I'm also loving the business that I bought because it's a passion business as well as a successful one. So,
well, let me ask you about that, Sean, because I recall you saying that you'd seen, when in your kind of biz buy sell browsing, more practical businesses, maybe more sound businesses, more of the type of businesses that a searcher would traditionally go after. And the conventional wisdom led you there, but then your heart, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of raised its hand and was like, if I'm going to leave safe corporate, where I'm clearly having a lot of success, and there's a path laid out for me, and I can continue having success. I want to do it for something that lights me up, not just for more drudgery, even if I get to be my own boss in that drudgery. Elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'm surrounding myself in beautiful art every day in the workplace, and the art is my business. And part of the fun now is that I get to curate the art. I get to develop the relationships with the artists, and that is like so fulfilling for me. And I've also taken it upon myself to really study the art industry, and along with that comes some really great things, right? So I've booked a ticket to go to the Miami Art Week, right, where Art Basel Fair is going to be among a dozen other fairs. It's a 5-day thing, and I can't wait to go just like parachute in there and learn about this other aspect of the art industry, right? Because like I told you, there are some echelons to the business, and some of that is probably out of my reach in terms of, the expense of the pieces that, they're going to be showing. And some of them are installations, but I'm rounding out my knowledge, and I booked another trip to go to the European Fine Art Fair in Maastricht, Netherlands in March next year, where I really want to get into, the European art community and understand what they're doing, because right now most of our artists are North America based. And if I'm able to expand internationally and, curate some interest in that, I think that'll be fun. So it's a journey for me, and it's a labor of love in terms of learning about something that I've always been interested in, and never been able to really devote the time that I wanted to it. So
Sean, it's so fortunate that you not only found a business that is a labor of love, but it's also a really strong business, because as we've already talked about, often those things cannot fall in the same bucket. But here is a passion business that is also a really good business. It seems like a business that would require passion. Like it seems like your customers, your employees are going to require your interest in art in a way that maybe somebody buying an HVAC business, the crews don't necessarily expect you to be an HVAC technician or an HVAC expert. Now, kind of earning credibility with those crews is part of the process. It is something you need to do, but they're not going to expect you to develop actual functional knowledge so that you can go out alongside them in the crews. So some learning is definitely expected to earn credibility with your team in kind of a blue collar business, but not all the way in. And in this, you probably got to go all the way in. They probably wouldn't appreciate in an art gallery business an arm's length kind of owner. Am I right about that? And then also curious, could you have seen yourself buying a blue collar, a more kind of practical business? What would that have looked like for Sean? Was that ever in the cards?
Yeah. So I to answer your first question, I think, could anybody step in and buy an art gallery business with or without the passion? Sure. But are you going to be credible as the owner and the person that's driving the business if you don't have the passion for it? Probably not. But I think that there's a parallel with that to any business to some degree. Like, you need to establish the credibility with your crews or your teams or your sellers. And, the difference for me is having the passion for it just makes it like so palatable, and not just palatable, but makes it just so like invigorating every day.
Yeah.
That it's such a difference maker, right? So, and that actually led to my ultimate decision, because I was heavily weighing a few other companies. Some of these companies were like a construction generator rental company. One was a multi-family dwelling renovation company. Mm-hmm. Another was a home construction company, and these were all kind of like in my scope criteria that I had narrowed down on Biz Buy Sell. And I really thought about it, and I looked at a lot of these, and at the end of the day, it came, and I know so many people go out there and they buy a business that they're not passionate about, and maybe it's hard to be passionate about an HVAC business, or hard to be passionate about a generator rental company, but are you passionate about building your family's future? Then absolutely. If it's a sound business, then you go in there, you figure out how to run it. And if you can step away and let the teams run it that you've highly trained over a few years, then I think that's a great recipe. I just happen to get lucky with, seeing this like beacon of light out there at Biz Buy Sell the first time I looked, and it was just something, it just kept pulling me. And ultimately I considered I think, the differences of, managing some of the labor teams, in the services business and all the HR that might be involved in that. And, some of the transient nature of some of the employees. I weighed that and I thought, I actually don't want to deal with that as much. I'd rather be dealing with people that love art, that are interested in it, and that can teach me about it. And then I can just go skyrocket into this place that I love.
I think that's a perfect place to leave it. Sean, if people want to get in touch with you, how should they reach out?
Yeah, you can email me at sean@fascinationst.com, or you can go to our website at fascinationstart.com, and we've got our phone number up there, and you can call into the gallery anytime.
Congratulations, Sean, on not only buying a business, which everybody who sits in your seat there deserves to hear, but also in finding this passion business. It's such an interesting business. We could have spent another hour with me asking you about the ins and outs of the gallery business. So maybe another time, but really interesting and really cool that it just lights you up so much. So thanks for coming on, sir.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Will. I loved coming on here and loved getting to know you in the process too.
Thanks, Sean. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.